Dick Hortensius has a master's degree in analytical chemistry and has worked as a senior standardization consultant in the field of management systems for NEN and the Dutch standards body since 1985. Dick, take it away.
Thank you for introducing me, Laura. I will speak to you today about auditing against the new ISO 40001 standard that was published in the year 2015, while applying the upcoming new edition of ISO 90011. And you should consider this to be a personal view. It's not the official point of view of ISO or the Dutch standards body. It's just based on my own experiences and ideas about these two standards. It's already 27 years ago when my own journey in the field of environmental management and environmental auditing started. And that was during the first meeting of an ISO group exploring the relevance of environmental management as a standard subject for ISO. And there my journey started because I became the secretary of a subgroup of the ISO SAGE group on environmental auditing. And actually we then began exploring ideas on environmental management systems and related environmental management auditing standards that have later been taken on within the ISO Committee 207 on environmental management. I will cover in this presentation the following subjects. I will say something about the importance of auditing in relation to management and management systems. I will give a very brief overview of how auditing standards have been developed by ISO. And then I will have a more closer look on what the impact of the new high-level structure for the ISO management systems is on internal and external auditing, and also related to the new ISO 40001 standard that is based on that high-level structure. And then I will look at how ISO 9011 and the new technical specification 17021 Part 2 contribute to effective internal and external auditing against HLS-based standards, and in particular ISO 40001. Auditing is one of the key components of management systems based on the PDCA cycle. The well-known cycle invented by Deming long time ago that can be described as plan, do, check, act. Plan, think before you start an activity, carry out the activity, check whether the activity is going on as you expect it, and act or react if that's necessary. And part of the check stage of PDCA is monitoring and measuring results of activities, but also to conduct internal auditing, whether any arrangements that you have planned for conducting the activities work as they were intended. And the third stage of check is management review, where top management reviews mostly the results of internal audits to review whether the whole plan, do, check, act, the whole system is working effectively. And this type of auditing is normally referred to as first-party internal auditing. The second way of auditing is the third-party assessment. If you look at a very simple value chain where a supplier provides raw materials or semi-products to a manufacturer that produces products that are delivered to the customer, then you have at various stages, you had in the past entry control or acceptance tests to see whether the raw materials were the ones that were suitable to manufacture the product, or acceptance tests by the customer to check whether the product delivered was meeting the requirements. And actually, instead of those acceptance tests, later on, so-called supplier audits were conducted to to prevent the necessity to check individual products, but to just assess the system of the manufacturer, whether that was capable to deliver products and services continuously according to the specs of the customer. And the manufacturer itself conduct then the same sort of supplier audits on the suppliers of the raw materials. And actually this was the model behind the first edition of ISO 9001 in 1986 that was published as a model for supplier assessment. Later on, 9001 further evolved into a full management systems description that was subject to third-party auditing. And that's actually the third sort of way of auditing done by an independent party. Again, you have the manufacturer that provides a product to a customer or has a system that should give confidence to stakeholders. And those products or systems can be certified by an independent party that then conducts a so-called certification or third-party assessment or audit and enters into a contract with the manufacturer to monitor the continuous compliance of the system or the product with requirements. And certification bodies are assessed themselves by an accreditation body that checks whether the certifying body is competent to do the job. And there are numerous standards for this system. Certifying bodies have to comply with ISO 17021 Part 1. Accreditation bodies themselves comply with ISO 17011, and that whole system is based on independent and competent assessments, the third-party audits. So we see that we have three types of audits: first, second, and third-party auditing, and actually they are all based on the same principles, the same methodologies, and similar, at least comparable competence requirements for the auditors and the audit teams. In ISO, audit standards have been developed over the years. When the first edition of 9001 was published around 1986, the idea was developed that internal auditing standards were useful to support the implementation of ISO 9001, and that was the ISO 10001 series, part 1, 2, and 3. Later on, ISO 40001, the Environmental Management System standard, was published in 1986, and similar, parallel to that, the separate EMS auditing standards have been developed by ISO 14010, 11, and 12. And at some point in time, especially within NEN, we considered this an unnecessary duplication of IDs, because auditing a QMS or an EMS is actually based on the same sort of methodologies. And we saw an emerging need with companies to be able to conduct combined audits, because they had combined systems, quality and environmental management systems as well. And that was the reason why NEN took the initiative to develop ISO 9011. The first edition was published in 2002, and that was the first standard with an ISO that combined the ideas of quality and environmental management as a basis for a more generic auditing guideline. So the separate parts, 10011 and 14010, 11, and 12, could be abandoned with and were replaced by the more generic ISO 19011 that was by that time for QMS and EMS auditing only. What we see later on was the development of more and more management system standards related to occupational health and safety, related to food safety, related to information security, energy management, business continuity management. And that was the reason to revise ISO 9011 and make it even more generically applicable to all types of management system standards. And that second edition was published in the year 2011. The strength of 9011 as a guideline is that it combines principles of auditing as a basis for an audit program. You could see the audit program as the sort of management system to conduct audits. It's also based on a PDCA approach. And from that program or system, the performance of individual audits are directed and organized by the system, the audit manager. And of course, you need competent auditors to do their job. The principles are underlying the whole system. The audit program is more or less the PDCA approach, systematic approach to conducting individual audits that are carried out by competent auditors, and the results of those audits are reported to management that is responsible for the effectiveness of the management system. And I think the strength and the success of 9011 is based on the good cooperation of these four building blocks, components of the auditing guideline. Coming back to the multiplicity of ISO management system standards that have been developed in the past. What we saw a number of years ago is that more and more management system standards were developed that gave actually the persons responsible for implementing these standards a headache, because most organizations would like to implement the various management system standards in an integrated way in the own management system of the organization. And because all those management system standards varied a little bit amongst each other, it became increasingly difficult to apply them in an easy and uniform way. And that was the reason that ISO established a group to look into the matter and to come up with a new sort of architecture of management system standards. And by that time, the Netherlands proposed actually a very simple model. We acknowledge that all those management system standards basically have the same sort of philosophy, the same sort of basic requirements, the same concept of PDCA, you could say. And we said, well, if we have a generic core with the basic requirements, you can actually build upon that core for the specific add-on requirements related to quality, to occupational health and safety, to environment, to safety, and any other subject. As long as you build them upon the same sort of basis, the same set of basic requirements, it's much easier for these standards to be developed and to be applied in practice in an integrated way. And actually, we call that the flower model. You know, the Netherlands are very famous about their tulips, and this was the model that we tried to sell to the ISO community. The model was basically accepted, but turned into the so-called plug-in model. And there the flower changed, you could say, to the operating system of a computer. The operating system of a computer is actually enabling a computer to conduct things, to do useful things. It is, you could compare it with Windows, for example. But as long as there is no plugin, no program, the computer won't function effectively. So you need the operating system as a basic organizational approach, but it becomes only interesting when you plug in the specifics, for example, for quality, environment, or occupational management, or specific sector standards. or generic guidelines related to risk management, compliance management, or social responsibility, or even specific guidelines that enhance the functioning of specific elements of that core management system. So the metaphor actually is that any organization has a basic operating system, its own management approach, and you can apply standards to ensure that that system of an organization is working well to manage quality, environmental, or occupational health and safety aspects related to the activities, products, and services of that organization. And this model is now the basis for the new generation of ISO management system standards that are all based on the same philosophy, the same core elements and requirements, and provide the additional requirements that are necessary for the specific discipline like quality, environment, food safety, or information security. And this architecture is now applied to all those ISO management system standards with the advantage that organizations can easily apply them in an integrated way, but also with the advantage that the core system is very much alike how a normal organization operates. 9011 is one of the important plugins in this model. It provides the additional guidance on how to conduct audits. Auditing is part of the core requirements, and ISO 9011 gives much more guidance on how to arrange audits within the organization. HLS was developed and published in the year 2012, and it's interesting to see what now the impact of the HLS and the new generation of management system is on the auditing practices, and also how ISO 9011 is being revised to meet the new requirements of the management systems. To give a brief overview of the content of the high-level structure, it consists of 7 clauses, starting with understanding the context of an organization. And that's actually, you could say, the environmental scan, the scan of the business environment in which an organization operates, issues, needs and expectations of interested parties and stakeholders. And the organization should consider how that information influences and impacts upon the management system and the scope of the management system. The second clause is about leadership and commitment, and it provides the requirements for top management that has final responsibility for the effectiveness of the management system, top management that has to formulate the policy, and top management that has to define the organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities within the organization. The clause on planning is actually about how to translate the business environment information to the risks and opportunities that the organization has to address to ensure that the outcomes of the management systems are as intended. Which risks, quality or environmental, have to be managed to ensure that the management system actually assists in improving the performance of products and activities, either quality or environment or safety performance. And also the clause addresses the whole process of establishing objectives and the plans needed to achieve those objectives. Clause on support actually defines the resources that an organization should have available for running the management system. These are financial resources, people, competent and aware people. The resources also relate to communication channels within the organization and to external parties. And the clause also describes the documented information, the documentation records that an organization might need to ensure effectiveness of the management system or to demonstrate the results of the management system. The operation is actually just operational planning and control, which controls are implemented in the processes to ensure that opportunities and risks are addressed and compliance obligations are complied with. Performance evaluation is about monitoring and measuring activities, conducting internal audits, and management reviews. 3 different ways of measuring the performance of the management system. And that is input for the improvement process, addressing non-conformities, taking corrective actions, but also continual improvement process. For example, innovation type breakthrough improvements that enhance the performance of an organization. This is the basic HLS, the basic requirements that you will find in all management system standards. And as I said, I think these are the sort of elements that you will find in any organization that is operating successfully on a continual basis. There are two ways of looking at the HLS, what I call the so-called horizontal and vertical integration. First, the horizontal integration. That is actually the red line, the thread through the management system from understanding the context to operational control. Understanding the context is about basically 2 sorts of questions. What is happening? What are the trends? What is the sort of business environment in which I operate? That leads to a range of issues and factors that an organization needs to consider to be successful, to operate in a manner that creates value for the organization and its stakeholders. And the second question is, who are actually the stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders that the organization is affecting? And what are the needs and expectations of those stakeholders? A strategic assessment needs to take place to set priorities, because you cannot serve all stakeholders. You cannot address all the issues. You need to set priorities, and you have to further analyze the priorities that you set as an organization. And on one hand, that leads to the concrete risks, the threats and opportunities that the organization needs to address. And on the other hand, it leads to the requirements, needs, and expectations that the organization needs to address to satisfy the ultimate customer or governmental authority. The risks and opportunities are addressed with a risk management approach, and the requirements are managed with a compliance management approach that is described in the high-level structure. And both are input to operational control and monitoring activities. And this is the basis for all the ISO management system standards. You have the same philosophy towards risk and compliance management. And it enables an organization to have a similar integrated approach to addressing risks and compliance, no matter whether these are related to quality, environment, or occupational health and safety. It can be used as the basis for integrated management. The second sort of perspective of the HLS is the link between setting strategy and conducting the operational activities. The strategic level of an organization is concerned with doing the right things. And the right things you can derive from the business environment in which you operate and the stakeholder needs and expectations that you need to address. And that understanding of the context sets in motion a strategic PDCA cycle, starting with context assessment, exerting leadership, setting the policy and the organizational structure, and the PDCA loop is closed with the management review. On the operational level, it's important that the organization is doing the things right. And that's also a PDCA loop. It starts with the specific objectives of a project, a department of a project or a product. It is about operating, monitoring, and measuring. And there the loop is closed with internal audit and corrective action and improvement. And one of the problems of especially larger organizations is what is now the linkage between these two levels? How are these two PDCA loops linked and related to each other? And HLS provides two important linkages. First linkage is the policy deployment. There should be a clear line between strategic policy and objectives and the more operational objectives and targets. But the second, even more important line is the link between the strategic risk assessment and the operational risk and compliance assessment. The relationship between what you see in the business environment and how you translate it as an organization to the more concrete opportunities and risks and compliance obligations that you need to address, and the operational controls related to those. When an organization has this link, there will be a much better relationship between strategy setting and operational control. But also the feedback loop is very important because monitoring and measuring, and especially internal audits, provide important information on the operations that is fed back into the management review, where top management can review that information to evaluate the effectiveness of the management system and make any changes that are considered necessary. So we see here that internal audit is a very important element in linking the strategic and operational PDCA cycle, and internal auditing will increasingly support the relationship of strategic and operational level, and therewith also contribute to the governance of organizations. The strategic level is about direction, and the operational level is about control. And internal auditing is a very important tool, both an assessment tool and an information tool, to ensure the link between directing and control activities in an organization. Another look at the high-level structure. In red, you see actually the elements that are most different compared to the former editions of the ISO management system standards, especially the whole notion of context analysis, the importance of leadership and planning, the operational risk and compliance assessment are new elements that give a much more strategic emphasis on those management system standards. And because of that, a linkage can be made between the ISO speak in the ISO standards and the more generic management processes that every organization is aware of nowadays. The importance of leadership, stakeholder management, risk and compliance management, process management, improvement and innovation. And the next slide shows how the HLS clauses and requirements can easily be related to those generic management processes. For example, leadership. Leadership is not only addressed in clause 5 of the HLS, but leadership is also related to scanning the business environment. Top management should have a vision, and from that vision you look at the business environment and can decide what is important to address, to take into account. Leadership is also responsible for providing the necessary resources. Leadership has to conduct management reviews to assess the effectiveness of the system. And leadership is also an important role in the whole improvement process. Risk management, as I explained, starts with the context, understanding the context. Information is then assessed as part of the risk and opportunities assessment and the assessment of requirements that have to be complied with. Risk controls are part of the operational requirements in Clause 8. The effectiveness of the risk controls is monitored as part of Clause 9, and corrective actions are taken. So risk management is not as such a term used in the HLS, in the core management system, but actually by combining the various elements in a smart way, you can see that risk management is really one of the basic processes embedded in the HLS. The same holds for compliance management. It also starts with the context understanding, but then the focus is on stakeholder needs and requirements that are the basis for establishing the requirements that have to be complied with when you conduct your processes. It goes along with the risk management in many aspects. Risk and compliance management are in most organizations very close together. They both start with the business environment in which you operate, and they both lead to establishing controls in the processes to ensure addressing risks and addressing compliance obligations. Also, stakeholder management is embedded in the system. Here, communication is an important aspect, communication with stakeholders to provide feedback to stakeholders, but also communication to better understand their needs and expectations to be able to take them into account. Process management is historically a very strong aspect of the ISO management system standards, and you can find process thinking and process management in almost every clause of the high-level structure. Improvement management, the same story, but here you look at the policy and related objectives more strongly, because improvement is always related to trying to achieve or even enhance objectives that you set yourself. And finally, a part of the system is, of course, to ensure that the support activities are implemented in the organization. Not only the operational support, part of Clause 7, but also the structure, the organizational structure, the division of roles and responsibility throughout the organization addressed in subclause 5.3. And the interesting aspect, I think, of this matrix is that it provides audit trails. If you want to audit compliance management in your organization, the effectiveness of compliance management, it's very easy to see how you should combine the various requirements in a standard like 9001 or 40001, as indicated by the red cells in the matrix, that provides you the trail to audit whether the compliance management processes are operating effectively. The same holds, for example, if you want to audit leadership and commitment. What are the specific parts of the systems, parts of the requirements that you have to look at? But also horizontally, you can establish these audit trails. For example, you can see how leadership is exerted in the various generic management processes. Not only leadership as such, but also leadership and compliance management or leadership and process management. Or you can audit the effectiveness of the whole performance processes. Processes related to risk management, compliance management, or stakeholder management. How the evaluation of those processes is carried out and whether that evaluation process is effective. So applying this matrix provides auditors with the first information of establishing auditing trails vertically or horizontally throughout the organization. If we look at the diagram that connects the strategic and the operational dimensions of the organization, we can position the various parts of ISO 9011, the various parts of the auditing system. The audit program is more strategically oriented. It's mostly closer to top management. Top management should also give sponsorship to the audit program. The audit manager is actually a little bit between the operational and the strategic level of an organization. And the audit manager should establish the audit program, but also ensure that the audit program is translated adequately into individual audits that are carried out, audits mostly carried out on operational processes. The audit manager is also responsible for providing the feedback, the results of audits in audit reports to the top management, to enable top management to review that information during the management review. And finally, competent auditors need to be available to carry out the jobs of conducting individual audits. So looking at the strategic and operational dimensions embedded in the management systems, you can position the various bits and pieces of what is described in ISO 9011, and it can provide you with the logics of establishing an audit program that is more strategically oriented, that should ensure the conduct of more operational oriented individual audits, and ensure that the results of those individual audits are translated into relevant information in the form of audit reports that can be provided as feedback to top management on the strategic level again. So what is now the impact of this new approach to management systems on auditing and especially on ISO 9011? I already indicated a little bit in the previous slides, but a couple of statements can be made. Auditors should be aware of the fact that there will be an increasing emphasis on integrated auditing, not only combination of quality and environmental auditing, but also combination with safety, with security, with all sorts of, well, discipline specifics. And finally, even auditing of management systems will be related to the internal financial audits conducted by organizations, something not yet realized with the new 9011, but I think it is an inevitable future development. The impact of auditing has a more strategic character related to what I showed, the connection between the strategic and the operational cycle, but results of audits reports will also contribute to better governance of organizations. I think very important is that audits need to be risk-based. Audits really need to focus on the critical aspects of what is addressed by the management system, on the critical aspects in the processes. And environmental audit should focus on where are the environmental risks and opportunities, how are these addressed by the organization, and is that done in an effective way. Risk assessment is the basis for establishing priorities and give focus to internal and external auditing. And also there are new elements in the HLS like leadership, like compliance, like even a stronger emphasis on process management. And those elements need to get adequate attention during internal auditing and external auditing as well. So enough reasons to start an update of ISO 9011. That was done in a new project committee with the number 302. The leadership was and is with the US. The first meeting was in November 2016, and the publication of the new edition is already envisaged in July this year. So in a rather short development process, the new 9011 has been established. It's important that a new principle has been included, and that is related to what I just said, the importance of the so-called risk-based approach to audit. An audit approach that considers risks and opportunities. Risk and opportunities assessment, as I said, is actually the basis for establishing a good audit program and the conduct of individual effective audits. And the principle is described as the risk-based approach should substantively influence the planning, conduct, and reporting of audits, with the aim to ensure that these audits are focused on matters that are significant for the audit client. And the audit client in many cases will be top management that sponsors the conduct of audits to get relevant information on whether the management system is operating effectively and whether risks and opportunities are addressed in an adequate way. So the whole focus of internal auditing in future will be based on this risk-based approach that is very much in line with the risk-based thinking in the new management system standards. It's good to recognize that there are two dimensions to this risk-based approach that you can find in 9011. The first dimension is actually the risk and opportunities that are related to the audit program objectives. So that's more the risks and opportunities related to auditing as an element, as an activity within the management system. For example, the risks can be that insufficient resources are devoted to auditing, that insufficient team competencies are present, that there is lack of cooperation between the audit team and the auditee. All those aspects are risks that the audits do not deliver what they should deliver. And the same holds for ineffective planning, or maybe the risks that are related to the presence of an audit team on the work floor. Think about the audit team that disturbs the environment in a clean room, for example. But this is more internally oriented towards do the audits deliver the intended results. The second dimension is what I think is more important, that the audits are focused on the way in which the organization addresses risks and opportunities related to quality, environment, safety, information security, the risks and opportunities that are managed by the management system. And audits should focus on the most relevant parts of the organization or the most significant risks, because these are the knowledge of how these risks and opportunities are managed provides the most relevant information on the effectiveness of the management system. But both dimensions are present in the risk-based approach of ISO 9011. The principle is elaborated upon in the various clauses of 9011, especially in the clause 5 on the audit program. you can find various ways in which risk and opportunities play a role, for example, in establishing the extent of the program. The more risky the organization that is subject to auditing, the more extensive the program will be, and the wider the range of individual audits will be that has to be conducted. It's also related to what is now relevant information that should be provided by the auditee to the audit team to be able to make a risk assessment as a basis for conducting the audit. For example, what are the objectives that we try to achieve as an organization? How did we address the context? Which information of that context did we take into account as an organization to identify risks and opportunities? That information is relevant for the audit team to establish an audit program and to give focus to the individual audits. And within the program, it's clear that priority should be given to auditing matters, departments, projects, products with a higher risk related to the management system that is audited against. Within the clause on auditing, in conducting individual audits, there is limited attention on how the risk-based approach should be applied, but in the annex there is a special paragraph included on how to audit the risks and opportunities management process of an organization. So in that annex, additional guidance is given on how to conduct audits with a focus on assessing the effectiveness of the risk and opportunity management process of an organization. And finally, in clause 7 about the competence of auditors, it's specifically guidance is given on how the competence of the audit team is influenced by the types of risks and opportunities that are addressed by the management system that is audited against. And also that the auditor should be able to understand the principles of risk-based auditing, which is logic because auditors should have enough understanding to be able to conduct risk-based audits, because those really contribute to reports that matter, that are significant for top management to take into account. The alignment with the HLS, one of the objectives of the revision of ISO 9011 can especially be found in the annex to the guideline, where various paragraphs are included that focus on auditing specific aspects, dimensions of management systems. For example, the process approach to auditing, to focus on how processes are interacting and related to each other. What I particularly found an interesting paragraph is the one on professional judgment. As I explained earlier, the added value of the HLS is especially the connection between the various requirements, and the effectiveness of the system is very much dependent upon whether an organization has effectively addressed and understood those interaction between the requirements, because that leads to good risk and compliance management processes. And a professional judgment says that an auditor should not focus only on is a specific requirement met or not, but also the auditor needs to understand the intent of a set of requirements or a clause, and to be able to give a judgment whether the requirements together are well implemented by the organization and lead to an effectively operating system. So it goes beyond just individual findings, but it's also the overall professional judgment of an auditor, whether a concept like leadership commitment is implemented throughout the organization and throughout the management system. It's also said that audits should focus on the intended outcomes, not only whether the individual elements of a system are available, but also whether the combination of all those elements in the end lead to a system that is able to achieve the intended outcomes: good quality of products and services, sound environmental performance, safe working conditions for the employees. The specific topic of context, understanding of the context, is addressed in clause 8a, where the auditor should assess whether suitable processes have been developed and are applied by the organization, what types of analysis are undertaken, whether this is done by competent individuals that are really able to not only assess the context, but also draw the right conclusions from that information as a basis for developing the management system and to set priorities in the management system. Auditing leadership is, of course, a specific topic. How do you assess top management commitment? By not only interviewing top management at one point in time, but also reviewing, assessing the role that top management plays throughout the system over time, and not only focus at top management level, but at all relevant management levels within an organization. Auditing compliance as a process and auditing the risk and opportunities management as a process gets special attention in the annex of ISO 9011, and it provides guidance on how auditors should have a look into the processes of an organization from the identification of risks and requirements to be met until whether the sound controls have been implemented and whether those controls are monitored for their effectiveness in an adequate way. Then some words about 40001. The main changes are can be divided in two categories: the ones related to the application of the HLS that I have explained earlier on. Those changes are addressed by the subclauses that I just mentioned from 9011. For example, the auditing of leadership commitment or auditing of the effectiveness of the risk management process. And the second category of changes in 40001 are related to what we call the Future Challenges Study Group that made an analysis of the changing context in which environmental management systems operate. And that led to new requirements related to the life cycle approach, and not only look at environmental aspects that the organization can control on its own activities, but also environmental aspects related to the value chain that the organization belongs to, evaluation of compliance that has a different character, communication requirements. Those changes are not related to the implementation of the HLS, but are related to, well, new developments in environmental management. And it is good to see that 9011 also addresses these new sort of topics in special paragraphs in the annex of ISO 9011, like how to monitor the effectiveness with which the life cycle perspective has been applied when establishing a system like 40001 or a system related to quality or safety management. And here again, professional judgment seems to be a very important way of looking at, because the requirements on life cycle perspective are not related to very specific requirements in the standard, but it's more an approach that should be embedded throughout the system and the implementation of the system. And supply chain, the interaction with suppliers, is also a specific topic addressed in the annex of ISO 9011. So it's good to see that new elements of 40001 and other management systems are reflected in 9011 to enable internal auditors to do a good job and to audit the system in a way that provides information that top management can act upon. A few words about the tools, the ISO standards for third-party certification. We have seen in the past that separate guides were developed for QMS and EMS certification. They have been merged into a single standard 17021 in the year 2006, and that standard relied quite heavily on ISO 9011 as the audit methodology. In later years, we have seen that more separation again took place. We now have the generic 17021 Part 1, providing requirements for certification bodies that conduct management system assessments, with additional technical specifications that provide specifically the competence requirements for quality, environmental management systems auditing, and a range of other types of management systems. I think that we now have already 10 of those add-on standards that give specific competence requirements in addition to the generic 17021 Part 1. A couple of years ago, 17021 Part 2, the environmental add-on has been reviewed, and it was concluded that it needs to be revised because of the changes in ISO 40001 that I just indicated as a result of the high-level structure and more specific environmental considerations, like the more strategic focus, the leadership component that is now present, the life cycle perspective, and all those reasons were taken into account when revising 17021 Part 2. And in red, you can see that various elements have been added to the competence requirements to ensure that auditors have the adequate background to audit against the new standard, to audit against the new requirements. The life cycle perspective, compliance obligations, and topics related to communication, context assessment, and risks and opportunities again. So the new 17021 Part 2 contains stricter and more elaborated competence requirements that should ensure that third-party auditors know what they are doing and can do a good job. So in summary, I hope I explained that auditing is a key component of management systems, and it's even of growing importance given the new high-level structure-based management system standards that have a more strategic character, a more strategic impact on organizations, and auditing should be conducted in such a way that it is in line with it more strategic orientation of management systems. The quality of performing audits, and especially also for reporting audits, is critical to their impact and to the relevance of audits for top management and the added value that audits provide for an organization. Those challenges on internal auditing are posed by the new standards, 40001 HLS, but more importantly are posed upon auditors because of the new way of operating management systems based on the standards but implemented by organizations all over the world. And I think that the revisions of 9011 and ISO 17021 Part 2 contribute to to auditing and ensure that auditing remains relevant and provides organizations and especially top management of organizations with information that is relevant for them that they can use to redirect the management systems and ensure that those management systems add value to the organization and are worthwhile to implement and to maintain. I thank you very much for your patience and attentions. And if you have any questions, this is my contact and you can send me a mail and I will try to respond. Again, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Dick. This ends today's presentation. Have a wonderful day.